Today's presentation is going to be on leveraging the data analyses tools that are built into our iMapInvasives database. So my name is Douglas Knopf with the New York Natural Heritage Program. I work as the project specialist for the invasive species database on the iMapInvasives team. And I'm also joined today by a couple of guest presenters. We have Abby Bezrutzik-Marino from the Long Island Invasive Species Management Area and Brittany Hernan from the Western New York PRISM. At least once a year, we like to include some user stories and some other professionals who utilize iMapInvasives to share some examples of how they utilize some of our tools and features within IMAP. So we're going to be having them give their presentations on how they utilize some of the data analysis tools in IMAP. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started. This webinar is being recorded. After the webinar is completed, I'll be sending out an email to all of the attendees and registrants with some additional information, any links or web pages that we mentioned during the presentation, and a link to the recorded webinar. If anybody has any questions throughout the presentation, you can put them in the chat box. We have Mitch O'Neill from the iMapInvasives team as well, monitoring the chat box to answer any questions that come up during the presentation. And we'll also have a bit of time at the end to answer any additional questions. So the way today's webinar is going to be structured, go through a little bit of introduction on iMapInvasives. We'll go through data organization, some ways that you can organize the data that you're putting into iMapInvasives, go through exporting data, some of the data analyses that you can do through the database interface, and then if there's time at the end, we'll go through email alerts quickly as well. So to start off, iMapInvasives falls within the New York Natural Heritage Program, which is the organization that facilitates the conservation, basically data collection and record keeping of rare, threatened, endangered species and ecosystem type information for New York State. And as one of the greatest threats to rare, threatened, and endangered species is the establishment and spread of invasive species, we also have the Invasive Species Database Program established within the Natural Heritage Program. So besides the iMapInvasives tools and database, there's also things like the Watercraft Inspection Stewardship Program and various data analyses tools. So for iMapInvasives, we operate as the centralized invasive species database, mainly supporting our professional agencies throughout the state, things like the Department of Environmental Conservation, Parks, DOT, and the PRISMs, as well as a host of other partners throughout the state that are doing work related to invasive species. Over on the right, we have some of the tools and features that we offer throughout the database, but a lot of these are what we're going to be discussing today, so I won't go into too much detail yet. So when I mentioned that we're going through built-in data analyses tools, what I mean by that are ones that you can access directly through the iMapInvasives database. So when you go to nyiMapInvasives.com and you log into your account, you go to this database map viewer. And there are several tools that are built into this that we'll be going through today. So these are the things that I'll be talking about. Over on the left in the menu, there are projects and organizations. And like I mentioned, if we have time at the end, going through email alerts. And over on the right side there on the toolbar, the export and report button, which I'll be going into greater detail. So to start off, different ways to organize the data that you put into iMapInvasives through organizations and projects. So there are tabs in the menu button for organizations and projects specifically. The easiest way to see your projects and organizations and to join new ones is by going to your account. So using the Your Account button on the menu, you can see all the information for your account, and then there are two boxes at the bottom for the organizations and projects that you are already a member of. You can also hit the Edit button in the upper right if you would like to join any sort of new organization or project if you know the name of the ones that you're trying to get into. So when you hit the Edit button, you'll get these buttons that show up in the organization and project boxes that will allow you to request to join any sort of organizations. It will give a drop-down menu where you can type the name of the organization or project that you were trying to join, and it will allow you to request to join these organizations. Afterwards, you hit save. When you request to join an organization or a project, it will send an alert to the administrators of that organization or project. If an organization doesn't have an administrator, a message will be sent to somebody on the iMapInvasives team and we'll be able to put you into that organization. Once you're admitted into an organization or project, it will show up on your account page. Organizations are great if you are doing invasive species work in a professional sense. So if you are working for one of those agencies that I mentioned or the PRISMs, basically if your job is to do invasive species work, there's likely an organization that exists for your agency already. If not, you can reach out to the iMapInvasives team and we can make an organization for you. If you are just doing invasive species work as a volunteer or a community scientist, you probably don't need to have your own organization. The one exception to this would be if you are conducting any sort of invasive species management and you would like to input treatment data into iMapInvasives, you do need to be part of an organization to submit treatment data. If this is the case, you can reach out to us. We can put you into a special organization, which is basically a non-professional organization, and this will allow you to collect treatment data. More geared towards community scientists and volunteers are projects. And these are great ways to kind of section data off within an organization if you're working on specific projects, grants, if you're doing work at a specific property or things like that. Like I mentioned, it's great for volunteers and community scientists. So you don't have to add anybody who's doing volunteer work into your organization. You can just add them to a specific project and their data will be attributed to that project. So just an example, if you were doing, a Japanese stiltgrass poll for your local PRISM, you might be added to a project underneath the PRISM organization. If you are added to an organization or a project, you can also set them as defaults in many of our data collection tools. So this is a view of the preferences page from our iMapInvasives mobile app. You can set the default organization or project. That way, any data that you are collecting is automatically attributed to that organization or project and will allow for easier filtering later. If you haven't logged in or retrieved iMapList for your data collection tool in a while, and you've been recently added to a project or organization, you may need to retrieve lists just to refresh that and have those new options show up for you. And if you make any sort of changes to any of these, make sure you save any of those changes so that they are reflected in the data that you are collecting. So that's a real quick rundown of data organization, and we'll jump right into exporting of data. So the iMapInvasives database allows you to take pretty much any data set that you're interested in, and you can take it out of iMapInvasives to do whatever sort of analyses that you would like to do with it within your own programs. So like I mentioned, in the upper right-hand corner of that toolbar, there is a button, Export/Report. When you click on that button, it will bring up this window. By default, it'll be on the Export option. And there are several different tabs that you can go through here. The first of which is the export type. So there's two main types of data that you can export, or I suppose two formats that you can export data in, either tabular data or spatial data. So tabular data, that's your run-of-the-mill Excel file. The files are exported as CSV files. All of the columns of information, or all of the data fields within IMAP are represented by different columns in that Excel file. And when it is exported as a CSV, it's basically a very simplified version of an Excel file. Doesn't really work that well if you're trying to do any sort of analyses within it, adding formulas or changing things around. So if you do want to do further analyses for the data within that file, changing it over to an XLSX file will allow you to do more complex features, like inputting formulas to do analyses with the data that's included in there. The other type of data that you can export is spatial data. So this is more if you want to do mapping, if you want to create maps using the data that is in IMAP. You can either export it as shape files or geodatabases. And this can be directly imported into GIS products like ArcMap, ArcPro, or ArcGIS Online. It will retain all of the spatial features from the IMAP database. So if a polygon looks a certain way in IMAP, you can export it and it will show up exactly the same way in your GIS product. And all the data that was attributed to the data points within IMAP will be represented in the attribute tables in your selected product. So after you've chosen the type of file that you want to export your data as, the next thing is whether or not you want to use the current filter. So if you don't have any filter options set beforehand, it will just filter all the data that is currently visible on the screen. And this can be restricted using the boundaries, which we'll go over in a minute. If you're trying to get a specific set of data, like specific species or taxa, it's best to specify in the filter beforehand so that you're just seeing that data and then go into the export options. Next up is the boundaries. So putting a boundary around the area of data that you want to export. And there are three main ways to do this. You can either use the filter option. So if you go into the geography tab on the filter and you select a certain property or certain county, it will just show data within that county. And then if you have nothing selected for boundaries, it will just use the current map extents, everything that you can see on the screen. So if you have all the data for a specific county, for example, on the screen, it will take all of that. Or you can set your own boundaries. If you hit this little slider here, it will change from using current map extents to allow you to specify your own, and that's either a drawn boundary or using an existing geography. So if you hit that slider, it will go over and a new button will show up, which will allow you to define or select boundary area. So this is what it'll look like on the map view. If you hit that button, the define or select boundary area, it will bring up a new box. And just before that, if the export record button is grayed out, that means that one of the required options hasn't been selected yet. So if you can see next to export type and next to custom area, there's a little red star, means you have to specify for both of those before you can export any of your records. So if you click on that, define and select boundary area, by default, it will bring up this new window. It defaults to drawing a boundary. That is the first option there. You can then toggle between using the existing. If you click the using existing, they'll go to the other screen and have a button for going back to draw. But this is the first one that you'll see. It basically allows you to use your mouse to kind of click around a certain area and define your own boundary. So if you wanted to get all of the records that were in Long Island, for instance, you just kind of click a box around Long Island and it will make that bright orange box there to represent what data will be exported. And you can do a redraw if you're trying to make a new feature, or buffer it if you're trying to expand to a certain area outside of your selected area. If you click that use existing geography button to toggle over to the other option for selecting a boundary, it will go into this screen where you can choose a geography type. These are all the same options that are available within the filter tool. So things like state boundaries, counties, municipalities, prism regions, things like that. The one good thing with selecting it within the export tool is that it will automatically put the boundaries onto the map. So here I chose county and district, and the outlines for all of the counties are automatically placed onto the map for you to choose from. And once you select your county or whichever geographic boundary that you want to export the data for, that area will be highlighted in orange the same way it did when you drew your boundary. So if I'm trying to export all the data within Herkimer County for my current filter as a CSV, this is what it will look like, just as an example. So after all these things are set, the type, the filter, and the boundary, you just want to check that the layers you're going to be exporting are selected. If you don't have any layers selected, it will give an error and won't export anything. So you just want to hit this little drop-down list of show list of layers to be exported and turn on the ones that you want to be exported, and then hit the export record button down at the bottom. After you do this, it will indicate that the export request is going This could take, if it's just a small handful of records, it could take a few seconds. If you're doing many thousands of records, it could be several minutes. So you are able to hit that OK button. The process will still be going on in the background. There won't be any visual indicator that it's going on, but it will still be processing. And you can continue to use the IMAP interface if you want to do other things while it's processing in the background. You can also set up multiple exports or reports at the same time, and they'll run simultaneously in the background. And after a while, once the export is completed, you'll be met with a results window. So if everything goes fine, you'll get this little window of success, and your export is ready to download. You can either download the file directly from this. You can see the export status, which will show you all the layers that were successfully exported in a new window, or you can ignore it. That'll make it go away. It won't be downloaded to your computer, and you can continue on with whatever other exports that you want to do. You may also encounter this box if there's a partial success or a failure. Usually, if this shows up, it means you tried to export data in a layer where there was no data present. So if I wanted a certain species in Herkimer County and I knew there was presence data, but there wasn't any not detected data, but I still set the export to try to export not detected data, it will give me this partial success message. It's kind of like a task has failed successfully sort of message. It worked for what you were trying to have it do, but it didn't work for what IMAP was trying to do. So essentially, if you get this partial success, check the export status and see what went wrong. And if it's a data layer that didn't have any data in it, then everything should be fine and you can download your file. When you download a file, it will download all the layers separately. So not detected will be in a layer. Presence points, lines, and polygons will be in their own folders separately. And just one more thing on exporting data. There may be certain cases where the data that you're trying to export isn't really available for you. So there is a limit of 10,000 records per download. So if you're trying to download like 11,000 records, you can do one of 5,000 and one of 6,000. But if you're trying to download all data for the state and you have hundreds of thousands of records, that might be a little too much for you to do on your own. You may be trying to also download data that isn't necessarily available to the average user. This could include things like unconfirmed data or treatment data for an organization that you're not an administrator of. So if you're trying to get a specific set of data that you aren't able to download on your own, you can reach out to us directly, and we can set up a custom data export for you. And you can do this either by sending us an email asking for the data, or you can find a link to our data request form on our website under the Data and Maps tab. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Abby to talk a little bit about how LISMA does some work related to data exports.
Great, thank you. Yes, so I'm Abby Marino with the Long Island Invasive Species Management Area. We love working with iMapInvasives and sharing a project today about how we've used exports. Next slide. And next slide, we're talking about exporting data. So why might it be helpful to export data? Well, iMapInvasives has a lot of data to explore online. Sometimes it feels like too much. It might be too much for a project that you're looking at. Sometimes things could run a little, maybe more slowly than you'd like it to. And you just want to focus on maybe a certain species or a certain area. So IMAP Online can be great for quick searches to see the records in a specific area. I especially like the See What's Here report. That's great for interfacing on IMAP Online. But when you bring it to your desktop, you might be able to dive deeper into the data with the programs like QGIS or ArcGIS. One is open source, one is paid. You can compare it with other data, bring in any kind of data that you want, maybe like soil maps, maybe things that are related to your municipality. You can explore spatial patterns. You could prioritize observations to make more management decisions. You can modify any of the appearances of your data, the colors, and you could also work to make your own data summaries. The possibilities are endless. Next slide. So the goal of this project that we were working on with exported data was to merge some emerging invasive species data from iMapInvasives and iNaturalist. Emerging invasive species are species that are new to the region. If you're familiar with the tier system, we're thinking of tier 2 species, so ones that we would have the goal of eradicating because they're not yet abundant in the region and we want to keep it that way. So part of the goal is also to get an idea of the distribution and abundance of each emerging invasive species, and also to make more informed decision on management priorities and tier rankings. Next slide. So when I'm working with IMAP Online, I always like to start with filtering records, and the filtering tool has a lot of different options now. So once you sign in, go straight to the filter tool, and it can help things load faster. You only want to see maybe the data that you're interested in. There's filters sometimes you might want to do for a particular type of species, like aquatic invasive species is one we work with a lot. For obviously, you could filter by species itself, area, region, user, lots of possibilities. Pro tip for this, if you're using filters, is to bookmark the page in your browser to save this filter view, so you don't need to reset all those little filter buttons every time you log in. If you just click that bookmark, it will load up with that filter already there. So I use this all the time. Very helpful with exports if you're always kind of exporting the same kind of data but just want to update it. That's what I like to do. Next slide. Then next I would go to the export report button as we just explored, and it does a lot of things. As mentioned, the default is to export the data as a CSV, which was useful for my project. And it also, as a default, to use the filter that you just set. So if you've already filtered what you want to see, it's already there when you hit the export button. Then obviously there's the boundary as just mentioned. The default is to download whatever appears on your current screen, or you can filter it further by setting an area. Since I've done the filtering already, normally I just go with the default of appearing what's on my current screen. And then, of course, clicking export records, okay, and download a few little buttons there so don't get tripped up. But then you have your data that you want on your computer. Next slide. Now, diving a little bit more to the export type, as Doug just mentioned, for this project, any of these will work with ArcGIS, but might need a little bit of more manipulation depending on your familiarity with it. So CSV is comma separated values, like a spreadsheet. For this project, since I wanted to merge it with other data, I did go with using a CSV so that I could kind of control how I wanted the data to appear, what columns I wanted to see in my final output. But shapefiles and geodatabases can be really helpful for other types of projects, downloading them like points, lines, or polygons. Note that this could appear as multiple files when you download it, which might be surprising for you if you're not used to working with shapefiles as files. So you might see 5 things there for one file, but when you open it in ArcGIS, it's just one thing. So don't delete any files. And choosing these options are great if you want to go straight to working in ArcGIS and manipulating the data. Next slide. And for this project, we also downloaded data from iNaturalist. iMapInvasives now does like crosswalk data from iNaturalist, so you're able to see things there by toggling those layers on and off in iMapInvasives. But in this project, I wanted to make sure that I was getting the most recent data from iNaturalist for the project that I wanted. So a tip here is to use projects in iNaturalist where you can preset the boundary area that you're interested in. For in this case, this is the boundary of our Long Island prism. And you could also preset the species that you're interested in. And if you're doing those exports again and again, updating the data maybe a few times a year, once a year, this is already set up for you to just hit export and there you go. So just trying to make it easier if you need to be updating data. This is a project in particular that's showing emerging invasive species across Long Island. Next slide, please. So I'll talk about what I did with this data. Next slide. So a merge that I did here is bring multiple sources of data into one table. You can think of it like shuffling cards into one deck, and each observation is a card, and I'm trying to make them all line up and fit nicely with each other so that it's easier to investigate what's going on with all these different species. So this is just an example of what it might look like. You have IMAP data, which says things one way, iNaturalist data, which says things another way, and you're trying to add it up and bring it together. So here's some example data. And if you look closely, you might see some issues already, like these columns with the same kind of data might have different names, like in one it's called observer name, the other one is called observer, and same thing with observation dates. So if you're doing this kind of project, there's a lot of little details like that to be aware of. Also, some data sources have different common names for the same species, so you might want to look at that. There might even be commas inside the common name that you need to be aware of if you're working with the CSV. A lot of little details to be aware of in a project like this. Next slide. So why should you merge it all? In many cases, you probably won't need to because you're able to see different layers and it's okay that they're on different layers for your project. But for the project I'm working on, it made things simpler so I could retain the fields or columns that I needed and remove the ones that I didn't. That could be helpful in sharing with partners that they don't need to see every single column that a manager might want to see, but the public only might want to see certain kinds of data. It could also help with queries or digging into your data where, say, if you want to see all the observations of water lettuce with merged data, you only need to search it once because it's all in one data set. That could be helpful in tools like ArcGIS Online, where their filter tool, it's kind of simple. And so by just hitting a button, you could filter it to all those records. Next slide. So I did do this with Python. Rather than show a scary screenshot of a Python script, you can imagine there's a bunch of code that's telling the program how to put this data together. For example, like the issue I said before, bringing the observer name and observer column into one column, making that deck of cards stack correctly. And each individual thing is a simple action that adds up to a pretty data set. Then we can use the power of ArcGIS in Python and add in some other data sets to learn more about this data that we exported. Using spatial joins to see what town and county each observation falls in, which observations are concerningly close to priority areas, and also which observations might be easier to manage because they're on public land. So we brought in some layers for town, county priority areas, and public land. And then we got a summary for each species, what percent of those observations are on Long Island or versus New York City, what percent is near public land, and what percent is near priority areas. Next slide. And next slide. So here's what we got. This is a screenshot of a table that we made from this. So there are the emerging invasive species there on the left, some of them. And then we got a count for each of those species, how many were on public land on Long Island, which were conservation threats. Obviously, the tier can be carried over, the species type, and then it's also represented as percentages because sometimes that works better for our brains to get a snapshot of what's going on with this species. I think this in particular can be really helpful as we're assessing where is the species going and should it be re-ranked, put in a different tier? Should we be managing it differently based on this data that we can see now? Next slide. I also love making web apps in ArcGIS Online, even if I'm the only one playing with them. So this is a web app that is also showing that data. You can still have the attribute table where you can dig into everything, and a map and a filter tool on the side that can easily help you investigate this data, filtering it in preset ways that you might want to go to again and again, and looking at the date, species type, and next slide. Together, this helps us make smarter decisions. Some questions that we still have every year: which observations should we prioritize for visiting? Which emerging invasive populations pose the biggest threat? And which species should be re-ranked this year? Now we're better equipped to answer those questions. Next slide. So that's it. I hope you guys have other fun ways that you use iMapInvasives exports, and thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Abby. All right, so that's for exporting data, and up next we'll jump into data analyses through running automatic generated reports in IMAP. So again, I mentioned that these are built-in analyses tools, and I just want to shout out that we do have several external data analyses tools that do similar things using IMAP data. just not built into the actual database itself. So these are things like our water body lookup tool, a terrestrial prioritization tool, and management outcome viewers, some of which will use the live database, but just have a simplified version of it, like the water body lookup tool, and other ones that will have actual data exports and kind of a static view of the database information, such as the management outcome viewers. And then within the database, kind of built in, we have the ability to make automatic generated reports. So to get to the report tab, it's the same button as the export function. Just at the very top of that pop-up box that comes up, you switch over to the reports from exports. And when you hit that little slider, you will have just one box that shows up where you choose your report type. And there are 4 main report types that are available, which are approaching region, areas treated, infested area, and species list by geography. And some IMAP super users may notice additional report types within these fields. This comes with being a member of certain organizations or projects, may give you additional options, but for most users, you will just see the 4 default options. And we'll go through each of these to see how to utilize these report types. So starting out with the approaching region report, these are good to see which sort of species are nearby your area of interest, but are not yet found within it. So when you select that report type, a number of other options will show up. First off, selecting an area. This is the same process as you selected area for data exports. So either selecting a pre-made geographic area, like a county or a PRISM region, or drawing your own. You can select which layers you'd like to be represented in this, so either confirmed records or unconfirmed records, as well as approximate records. There is a slider to include iNaturalist data. So like Abby had mentioned, iMapInvasives does have an ability to crosswalk iNaturalist data directly into the iMapInvasives database, where you can then toggle that layer on and off. Once data in iNaturalist is considered research grade, so multiple people have looked at it and said that it is the species that it was reported as, every so often there will be an automatic crosswalk that brings that iNaturalist data into IMAP, and this gives you the ability to include that as well. You can then specify your species list if you want to change which species list you want to be on the lookout for. Usually best to use the one for your specific state. If you don't specify, we'll just use the network list, which can have a smaller selection of species compared to your state. You can then toggle on whether or not you want to use your custom filter that you had set up previously, and then specifying your buffer distance, the units and the distance for that. So just in this example, I have a little box drawn here within Herkimer County, and I want to see all the confirmed present species records using the New York list and my current filter of species. And I want to see all the things that are not within that box, but are around a 5-mile buffer of that box. You hit the run report button, same as generate exports. It will generate your report. And again, you can hit OK. It will run in the background if you're doing other things within IMAP. And then once the report is complete, you'll be able to view it in a new tab. And this is what the report will look like. It will specify all of the information that you put into your parameters. So you can see here, there's my 5 miles, my confirmed species, and my New York jurisdiction. And then it will list out all of the different species and how many records for each one that was detected within that 5-mile buffer. And from here, if you want to save this report or share it, you can take like a screenshot, or you can save as a PDF, so you can have your own version downloaded of this report. Next up is the area treated report. So this is good for if you're trying to get totals for all of the acreage of treatment data in a certain area. So a lot of similar options to before. Select your area, select the layers you're looking for, either treatments or confidential treatments if you have confidential data viewing privileges for your account. If not, you won't have that option available. You can also include a map screenshot into this type of report. So it will basically take a screenshot of your current map view and include it into the report itself. You can specify which species you want to export the data for. If you leave that blank, it will just be all the species that are shown on the screen or that are currently selected in your filter options. You can set a specific date range if you want certain months or years for the data range. If you leave that blank, it will just be, again, all data that is available on the screen. And then you can have the units that you want it to be represented in as well. And then there's also an option to remove overlap. So if you have multiple polygons on top of each other, if there's 2 polygons that are 10 acres each, if you don't have the remove overlap on, it will show as 20 acres. If you remove the overlap, it will just show 10. It will show the total acreage that is covered. And again, treatment data is available to organizational members and administrators. So here's an example. It gets a little bit muddled with the boundary orange, and then the treatment polygons are also orange, so it's a little hard to see here. But I have a boundary set around a set of different treatment polygons. So I have my boundary set up. I have a map screenshot of this area. I don't have any species specified, so it will take all of the data shown on the screen. I don't have any date range, so we'll have all of these. And then when you run the report, this is what it will look like. You can see the little map screenshot at the bottom here, and then it will give you the total acreage for all of the polygons with a certain species, grouping those together, and then giving you a total number of acreage at the bottom. The next report is the total area for present species, or area infested. So kind of similar to the treatment area. A lot of the options are the same. You can select your layers, whether you want confirmed or unconfirmed data, as well as confidential if you have the option. You can have that map screenshot again, choose your species, choose your date range, your units. And then you're also able to include points and polygons in your infested area, and you can set what you want each of those to be represented as. So if I, over on the right here, if I want to include all points and have an area attributed to them, I can set each point to be represented with a 5-meter radius, and then it will add that, pi times 5 squared, and it will add that to the total area that it calculates. So this is what the report will look like. If I have the points and polygons turned on, it'll give me each species and the polygon area. It will tell me how many points for each species showed up in that list, and then it will calculate that buffer area and add it to the total on the right-hand column, and then give me a total of all the area for all species. And then the last report type that is available, the most commonly used and usually the most helpful at first glance, is the species list by geography. So this will give you a list of all of the species that are present within your boundary area. So again, you can select your area, your layers. This gives you the option for most of the available layers. So your presence, your not detected, your treatments, all sorts of data that is available, usually within the filter options. Again, you can have a snapshot, whether or not you want to have your filter enabled, and then whether or not you want to include that iNaturalist data that I mentioned earlier. So here's an example using that same area from the last 2 reports. If I want to have all of the species with the confirmed data in my current filter options, this is what the report will look like. Just a simple list of all of the present species and how many times each species showed up. And this counts all of the point line and polygon data as a single occurrence of the species. And then we'll give you a total for all of them. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brittany from the Western New York Prism to talk a little bit about how Western New York Prism utilizes some of these tools. Brittany?
Thanks. So I'm Brittany Hernan, the Terrestrial Program Manager with Western New York Prism. and I'm going to talk about how we use iMapInvasives data analysis tools, mainly reports, to help partners in our region with invasive species management prioritization. Next slide. So we have a crew assistance program where partners can submit proposals for projects where our crew works alongside them to assist with survey, management, and restoration efforts. And so one part of this is completing invasive species inventory surveys to provide information on invasive species presence and distribution on a property. And so to start, I create a unique IMAP project, like was talked about before, just to help further organize the data that will be collected. And then our crew uses the iMap Mobile Advanced tool through Esri ArcGIS Field Maps to collect data. And I really like this tool because all staff members collect data in the same searched area, which is created ahead of time, so they could also see the property boundaries while they're working. And you can see in this picture, everyone's checking to make sure they've covered the entire area for the survey before leaving the site. Next slide. So then we come back into the office, review all of the data, and it gets uploaded to iMapInvasives. And then we could use that filter function to filter by that unique IMAP project that was created. So now we're only looking at the data collected on that property. But at this point, it's still a bunch of green points, lines, and polygons that we're looking at in the searched area. So we need to use some tools to better visualize and analyze that data. So to start, we run that species list by geography report. And this is a really nice starting point to summarize the data and begin describing some management recommendations for our partners. Next slide. And so you can see here we have kind of on the bottom of everything, it's the searched area and then the green points, lines, and polygons. So while everyone was in the field, that's the data they collected. And then we click on that export report button, select the species list by geography type, and then I just drew that yellow boundary around the area. I just make sure to include the entire searched area so it encompasses all of the data collected for the property. And then we run the report. And then the next slide. So this is what we get. It's a nice list of all of the species that are mapped on site. It has both the common and scientific names, and it also has that confirmed present species count column. So that's the total number of points, lines, or polygons mapped for each species on that property. And so to start, I circled the ones with the lower numbers. We usually start with these as a way to take a closer look at the data, the photos that were collected, the information, since the smaller populations on site will likely be a higher priority for removal for the partner. If there are only a couple plants to dig up, it's best to just get out there, dig them up, prevent them from spreading, but it's also nice to cross something off the list and feel accomplished. But it could have one polygon, and that polygon could be 50 acres, and then that's quite a significant project. So that's why we start with the lower numbers, but then dive a little bit further into the data. Next slide. And so just to summarize, from that species list by geography report, we share that with our partners, so they don't have to go log on and run this report every time. They just have it right in front of them, so they could see all the species that were reported on site. And then we take a closer look at the species with the lower counts. And in this case, it was species such as mugwort, bullthistle, privet, and common mullein. And, we want to see if these really are those high priority species for management. And next slide. So I'm going to skip the details because Abby and Doug nicely covered the export function, but I also use that to create these project maps. And so this map covers the entire site, and it focuses on the trees and shrubs that were mapped. Each species gets a different color, so we can see, where they are, how much space they take up in the area. And as I mentioned, we saw that privet only had that one count on site. So I wanted to take a deeper dive into this data, and looking at the map, only a single point was mapped during the entire survey. And then at that point, we could see the photo, and it shows a couple of seedlings and saplings, so really small plants that were found, and there's less than 5% cover. So using that IMAP report and the map, we could see that privet would be a high management priority for the partners. So we would tell the partners to, get out as soon as they can, dig up these small plants, including the roots, contain them. And this prevents further spread of the species, so it doesn't become like that larger blue polygon in there, which is the honeysuckle. So it prevents spread, but it's also nice for reporting to say, you know, we got out and we removed all of this species on our site this year. Next slide. And then we also saw in that report that mugwort had just 3 features mapped during the survey. So I wanted to take a closer look at that as well. In this case, it was a point, line, and polygon that were mapped. So the point and the line were like in the parking area, just a few scattered plants, but then there was this larger polygon. So I wanted to take a look at that. And looking at the picture, this infestation is much denser than the privet. It kind of, you know, the mugwort kind of covers the entire picture as far as the eye can see. And looking at the data, it was categorized as dense plants and 76 to 100% cover. So at this point, it's a little harder to tell just by looking at this if the species would be a management priority right away for the partner. It's pretty localized in the park, so it usually means it's a high priority, but it is a pretty dense infestation. So from here, we could use a second type of report called that infested area report. And so next slide. So I'm going to skip all of those details because Doug went over how to get to this spot, but just looking at the results, I chose just to look at the polygons that were mapped and look at the acres that are infested on site. So it just provides a little more insight. You know, we got that species list by geography that told us we should look a little further into mugwort. We looked at the map. So this is just that next step to see, you know, do we recommend the species for treatment to our partner? And using all of those tools together, it is a high priority for removal. It's localized in the park, only found in 2 spots, and the infestation is less than half an acre, so it would make sense to spend time treating it to prevent it from spreading further. And then next slide. So in summary, we use these iMapInvasives report types and other data tools to analyze our survey data with that bigger goal of helping partners with practical invasive species management planning. So kind of we look on the screen, you know, we go out with our tablets, collect that data, take the good photos, come back into the office, use these analysis tools, and help partners get out there and then carry out this action. You know, now we see people in the photo digging up plants. So it's a really tough part of invasive species management, but usually you can't do everything all at once. You need to determine what's a high priority to remove now, what might need to wait due to the size of infestation, the treatment time, the resources. So these IMAP tools really help us help our partners carry out meaningful management at their sites. Yeah, so that's all I have, and thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Brittany. Great insight into how you use the tools to prioritize management. And again, if anybody has any questions for either of our presenters, we will have a little bit of time at the end to go over questions if you want to put any of those in the chat. And just to wrap up, we'll really briefly go over iMapInvasives email alerts. So email alerts are a great feature to be alerted on sort of any new information that is coming in for either species or areas that you may be interested in. This was originally set up for alerting state officials to certain high priority species, but now it's available for any user to set up for any sort of thing they may be interested in. So for an example, if you are interested in something like European frogbit within a specific prism region, you're able to set up these email alerts for basically any combination of species, taxa, whatnot, and geography. And these can run in complementary to some of the reports that we mentioned earlier. So something like an approaching region report, if there's certain species that are not within your area of interest, but we know are on the outside, you can then set up an email alert for these species. So you're automatically alerted if any of them are reported in IMAP within that boundary area that you're interested in. We do have some help documents on our website that dive deeper into how to set up these email alerts. But just as a really quick run through, we can go through a little bit about it. So you can access email alerts by going to the menu button on that database home screen and going to your email alerts. There are several default alerts, and then there are also custom alerts that you can set up. So if you want to change those, you can go to the add/edit alert button, and it will bring you into the alerts page. If you're looking to add a custom alert, there's a button for that. and you can give it a name. You can say how frequently you want it. You can either have them immediately as soon as a record is put into IMAP. You can have a daily digest at a certain time, or you can have a weekly digest, certain date and time. And then as far as information, you have to specify at least a species or a location. For species, you can have a specific species name, a type, a genus, or a legal status. And for location, you can have any of the ones that have been mentioned throughout the presentation. Things like the state, your county, your PRISM region, things like that. And then for, just want to go back real quick to the general alerts. A lot of these are concerned with your specific data, so data that you have contributed to IMAP under your own account. Most of these are concerned with when there's changes to those data. So when something is changed from unconfirmed to confirmed, if it's put into an organization or a project, you can be alerted when your data itself changes. And again, if you're setting up any sort of email alerts or making any changes to your preset alerts, making sure you hit the save button so that they are all saved and they should start working immediately. And again, we have help documents that dive deeper into the different options. I will include a link to that in the email that goes out after the webinar. And that brings us to the end of the presentation.